What is up, and thank you for tuning into the RFN podcast. I am Kevin Lackey, your host, and today I have a great guest with me. His name is Sanjay Chandra, and he is someone that I consider to be one of the greatest entrepreneurs that I've ever met. He is one of the most disciplined people I've ever known. He is a mentor to me personally and one of my greatest friends. So I would like to welcome you to the RFN podcast, Sanjay. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words.
Well, I mean them. I mean them with all my heart. And what I love about these is just getting the opportunity to kind of talk. We know each other very well. When I say you're one of my greatest friends, I truly mean that. And so this is going to be a really fun conversation. So you're welcome, and thank you for being here. So what I'd like to do is for our guest is to why don't you give us a brief background on kind of who you are, where you started in your career, your professional life, and just some of your background and what your business is today and what your role is in that business, and then we're going to kind of go back and get into a lot of the detail of your journey. We just want to hear kind of about that.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Well, let me give a very high-level overview. Today, I am managing director, one of the two managing directors at Trinity Private Equity Group, which is my second entrepreneurial venture. To understand a little bit about my background, it helps to know where I came from. I am an immigrant, came from India when I was 3 in 1968. I like to say that I'm an immigrant, but it's really that my father and mother were immigrants. My father came as a graduate student in 1967, did his graduate degree at OSU just across the border. My brother, my mother, and I came in 1968 when I was 3. My brother was 4. And we ended up in Dallas very quickly after coming to the U.S. I had most of my childhood in a suburb of Dallas called Grand Prairie, and I grew up there where I went to South Grand Prairie High School. I had a pretty good childhood. It was uneventful, but fun. My family took very basic family vacations and cars every year. I was in the Boy Scouts. I played soccer. I was pretty active in junior high and high school with a lot of things. Ended up as an Eagle Scout, got that when I was 15, ended up going to the University of Texas after graduating from South Grand Prairie, where I studied electrical and computer engineering. Came out of there in 1987 and started my career in consulting. I became a management consultant with Arthur Andersen and Company just before they formed Andersen Consulting. I was with Andersen Consulting and Arthur Andersen, and then a third company a third namesake, but a second company, George Group, for about 5 years before I started my first company. And, all of those years were very formative for me, but I've had a nice career as a self-employed entrepreneur since age 25, when I started my first company, American Leather, with a partner. And that story I'll leave for discussion later, but it brings me forward to Trinity Private Equity Group, which is the company that I'm with now. And as a managing director, my partner and I share responsibilities for managing a team and a portfolio of investments that's over $2 billion. It has over 80 investments and over $2 billion of assets. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great background. I think it is important for the listener to be able to kind of get an idea of who you are. Knowing that that your family did come here as immigrants. And I have a quick question around that. It's interesting to me. I was born here with good fortune. Probably had similar upbringing. We didn't do anything too crazy, big vacations, but we did kind of go do stuff every once in a while. But for your family, do you know, or did your family discuss as y'all were making that decision, as your parents were making the decision to come here to the U.S., was that for the American dream?
It was. My father he actually grew up in a village in the state of Uttar Pradesh where my brother and I were born, and his village that he grew up in didn't have running water. It never had running water all the way to the point when his parents passed. It got electricity probably in the early 70s, but he had left home in the late 50s. So he came from a very humble background, but by the time he was married and had kids, he knew he wanted a better life for the family and had it in his mind to come to America. He borrowed money and just to come to graduate school, and that was the way to get a visa, through a student visa, and did his master's in 1 year and then brought the rest of the family over. But it was a big hardship to try to do that. He had to borrow money from his father-in-law, and he had to take a pretty big flyer, but it was absolutely for the American dream.
Yeah. So I think that's a part of the story where I do want people to hear, and I find it fascinating because that's not a part of my story that I can relate to and that most people can. I mean, this is your father who now lives over in South Lake near you. Is that
He lives in Grapevine, just about 5 miles down Dove Road from me, and so yes.
He's an investor in Trinity.
He is.
And they've come here and they've lived the American dream.
Yeah, so he came in his early 20s. He is 80 now, or he'll be 80 in August, and he has absolutely lived the American dream. I joke sometimes about saying I came to Texas as fast as I could. I know that's a saying, but when you're 3 and you're a lap child, you really didn't have a choice. So
yeah,
he came with a choice, and probably had it in his head originally that he would make a reasonable amount of money over here through hard work and then go back and retire in India. But after you've spent 10 or 15 years over here, it's hard to go back because life is not the same there as it is here. And so he has visited, and my family has visited India many times, but they've never attempted to move back.
Well, that's great. It's a great part of the story, and I hope that people here are listening, and we'll get into more of this later when we talk about how you and I met and how grateful I am for your father to have taken that journey because that led us to where we're at today and our friendship and our relationship that is helping me live my dream. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas with running water and all the things that all the needs met, and to know that you've been one of the biggest influences in my life, and I mean that, and you've had a huge impact on my opportunity to sit here, and I'm saying that because I mean it. And to hear that your father, it's not your grandfather, your great-grandfather, or your cousin's father, it's your father who lived in a village. To hear someone say a village, and then without running water, who decided to live the American dream that a lot of people kind of talk today bad about, like that the American dream is a bad thing. The American dream is alive and well if you want it.
It is absolutely alive and well. And I know it sounds like a big leap. So he didn't obviously come from the village to America, but his way out of the village was education. Yep. He got an engineering degree at one of the state universities there in the state of Uttar Pradesh where we were living. And after getting educated, he married my mother, who was also educated, and started his first job. Worked a few years, had my brother and I, and then decided to come over to do graduate school. And that was his way to get into the U.S. with a student visa. This was the late 60s, and back then, once you got through an education, you could get a green card if an employer would sponsor you. It wasn't the complications and the long waits that it was today. He got the green card within months, and got green cards for my mother, my brother, and I within months after that.
Do you have views or opinions, and this isn't a political podcast anyway, but on immigration today, has it changed so much that it's become hard, or have people taken advantage of it, or what are your thoughts?
It's definitely evolved over the years. So my father was the first in our family to come, but within a year or so, one of my uncles on my mother's side came. And then he brought his son, who's one of my closest cousins. Over time, several other aunts and uncles came. And today I have approximately half of my maybe 30-something cousins, or half on my mother's side are in the U.S. And so, but it's gotten harder and harder. And my views on immigration today are that we need immigration. It's unfortunate that the population is not growing at the rate that's needed to sustain a growth in our economy without immigration. And absolutely, you can see it. The number of people from India and certain other nations is helping to sustain our growth rate, and I think that's an important element for us.
Very cool. So I got one question that I had for later in the podcast, but I'm going to skip down to it just real quick, and then we'll jump into kind of the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey. There is a debate right now that I've seen. I don't know if it's debate or discussion, but just conversation around education and how important it is. And, you hear a lot of great stories about people with very little education. I didn't have the same journey as you through education and higher education. And I've turned out to be successful in my own right, different ways, however you measure success. But I'm doing a lot more than I ever thought that I would. And then you're very educated, just one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I've asked this question to other people, and you hear people talking about it on other podcasts and other stuff, saying education today it's a scam and other things. And I think that, unfortunately, the views of college and the expense and other things are tarnishing how important education is. So I wrote here, how important is traditional education in your opinion?
It's a great question, and it's something, Kevin, that I believe has been changing a lot. When I was being raised in the 70s and early 80s, because education was the way my father got over here, it was very important in our household to talk about going to college. Fast forward 30 years, I've been married about 25 years, and my oldest kids are in their early 20s. Today, I don't know that college is the way for everyone. The number of careers that weren't invented 10 years ago, they didn't exist 10 years ago, make today's college educations obsolete or inappropriate preparation for a lot of the careers that are out there. I think with technology comes change, and the traditional educations of economics or accounting or pre-med or engineering, they still covers a lot of jobs, but it doesn't cover probably half the jobs out there. So I would say today, my own view, and my wife and I discuss this sometimes, although all three of my kids are getting somewhat traditional educations. I have one that's an engineer and one that's graduated in social work. My third one is doing art, and art is not a traditional college field, and I think there's a lot of careers out there that don't benefit from a traditional college education. I believe that a large percentage of the kids today will benefit from other forms of vocational education after high school.
Well, I thought that it was an interesting question, and I wanted to ask you, I was curious as to your view, and that's another thing I love about these podcasts is getting to know people that you already know well. You get to ask kind of pointed questions. Chris Powers, who's a mutual friend of ours who did an episode with me, at the end of the episode, I asked him what was the best piece of advice he had ever been given, and he answered that and gave me a great answer. And I asked him what was the worst piece of advice anybody's ever given you, and he said that education was important. That around college and schooling, that he needed to go to college, and he's a smart guy, graduated from TCU University, and I just think that is something that's changing, and there should be conversation for young people about how they think about going into their career or their adult life after high school.
No, I agree. Well, it's certainly evolved, and even my views on it have evolved from when I was a kid. So I grew up thinking that was the only way to get ahead, and today I think for the average person it's a way to get ahead, but it's not the only way to get ahead.
Cool. Okay, so let's go back and start with your entrepreneurial journey. I think this is something really cool of how you decided, you went through earlier about how you, out of college, went into consulting and worked through Arthur Andersen and the George Group. And then at some point, and I kind of know the story, but at some point you decided I'm going to go into business for myself with a partner, but y'all started American Leather. So why don't you tell us about American Leather and kind of what led up to that entrepreneurial journey?
Great. Well, I'm going to actually take one step back, and I'm going to tell you, a lot of people have it in their DNA that they want to be an entrepreneur. And I knew probably by the time I was 14 or 15 that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. What I didn't know is what I was going to do. I knew by that point I wanted to be an engineer, so the most obvious route to being an entrepreneur would have been to have an engineering services firm. And going through high school and college, I assumed I'd go into some type of professional engineering work, which is services, and that I would end up starting a firm. My very first job out of high school was with a company here in Dallas called Hewitt Zollers. They are a civil engineering firm. Bob Zollers was someone that called me up out of the blue and offered me a job because his wife was Kathy Zollers was on the school board, and they saw that I was graduating top of my class, et cetera, et cetera. He offered me a job, and I went to work for a services firm, and I thought that was the way to do it. I saw him having success with that business, and that business still exists today. It's one of the largest regional firms in the area, did a lot of the work with DART, et cetera. When I came out of college, I still had that in my mind, but I went into consulting, and consulting also leads to services. But I was very fortunate. My first 3 years in consulting, I got to work with manufacturing firms. And the one thing about manufacturing is you don't manufacture a service, you manufacture a product. And the more I learned about manufacturing and the more I learned about products, the more I realized that I really, really wanted to have a product company, not a service company. And I was very fortunate. My first year at Anderson, I met a gentleman that is still my partner today. He is really the person who came up with the idea for American Leather, and he didn't come up with it till about 3 years later. So we met in '87, and by the fall of 1990, he came to me with an idea. And so here's the genesis of American Leather, and I'm not going to say it's mine, it's really his, but I was lucky enough, and we had enough common goals and objectives, we had common values, shared values, that when he came up with the idea, I was one of the first people he approached. And the genesis for American Leather was that Arthur Anderson, Bob Duncan, and a team had worked with a company in Dallas-Fort Worth called the Leather Center that manufactured their own product and sold through their own retail stores. The more he learned about that industry, the more he realized the industry did not have other manufacturers that had the quick ship methodology that they had developed for the Leather Center. The more we realized the industry was fragmented. It was heavily fragmented, a lot of mom and pops on the manufacturing side. It was archaic. It was not utilizing technology. And when I say technology, we're talking about manufacturing technology. Back then, the internet had not been invented yet. This was the late 80s. There was no internet. There was no email. People were still faxing orders around. They were doing things on the phone. You had to go into a store to buy anything. And so the technology I'm referring to is really manufacturing technology, but they were not using it. So it was fragmented and lacked use of technology. And so the opportunity was to develop a manufacturing business that catered to the special order needs of the higher end goods. It was made to order product, but made in a quick ship format. The industry at that time was about 12-week delivery time for domestic manufacturing and about 24 weeks for foreign manufacturing. The two biggest players sort of in the middle market was Leather Center, which was a company that we were consulting with, and a company out of Italy called Natuzzi. And there were some other players in the very high end, some at the very low end. China had not come on the scene yet at that point in time. And it was extremely fragmented, but the more we learned, the more we realized that there was an opportunity for a quick ship, special order manufacturer with domestic manufacturing to do 2 to 4 week shipping.
As I read somewhere on just learning the history about American leather that a part of the strategy was that your retailers, they only had to stock like the showroom floor models, and they could sell from that out of y'all's inventory because y'all could build it and turn it very quickly to the customers. Was that a part of the secret sauce?
Yes, that was absolutely. So, it's one thing to say, hey, the industry's fragmented, it's archaic. Well, the consumer's not thinking that.
Yeah.
The consumers or the retailer, which is our customer, we had to come up with the business reason for them to buy from us, and it was exactly what you pointed out. They could have floor models and no inventory in the warehouse.
They didn't have their own capital tied up.
They didn't
have to have a big storage.
No storage, no working capital, at least for our product line. And they could place an order. So Mrs. Smith could place an order on a Saturday. They could send the order in to us on a Monday. And somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks, we would ship it. They could deliver it, collect on it, probably before they paid us. Mm-hmm. And so they had a positive cash cycle. They probably took 50% down. It was it seemed like an easy business model. In the sense that an easy sale to the retailer. And there was clearly not a lot of people providing that quick ship model. Now, we learned the hard way after we started the business that the relationships that existed between the retailers and their manufacturers was a bigger stumbling block for us than the quick ship model.
Is that because it was kind of Wild West, a lot of under the table type stuff? Or
I don't know
more?
that it was that wild, but it was relationship driven.
Okay.
It was a lot more relationship because most of the retailers were owned by individuals, husband and wife, many cases. A lot of the manufacturers were owned by someone in the Carolinas where they had a relationship.
Yeah.
And we just assumed that a better mousetrap would sell itself, and that wasn't the case.
So one of the things I think is important to point out is that we're talking about this quick turnaround manufacturing. China wasn't on the scene, but y'all did this right here in Grand Prairie, Texas, in the United States of America.
We started in Dallas, which seemed really odd. Our first location was over off Irving Boulevard, which is an industrial part of Dallas. We have shifted 3 times in the history of the company, and then the current location is a Dallas address on the corner of Grand Prairie, and ended up being, a couple hundred yards from where I grew up. So.
Yeah.
It came full circle, but yes, we started 100% in Dallas, and it's been 100% manufactured in the U.S., and now we're in our 30th year of production.
Wow.
And we're still right here in Dallas, Texas. We never went to China when the rest of the industry tried. We never went to Mississippi or to Mexico, to lower labor areas, and if anything, we moved up market over the years. That original proposition of quick ship was a little bit of a one-legged stool, and it took a little time for us to find our way. We did eventually have to get into better styling, higher quality, and then eventually went into designer names and designer styles, and developed, a 3-legged or 4-legged stool over time.
Yeah, that today has, it's a 4-legged stool because it's killing it, right? I mean, what's the revenue?
So we were organically grown from 1990 till about 2006, I think 16. We've done a couple of acquisitions, but the combined company is around 300 to 350 million. We do have a dominant market share, greater than any other participant in our price point. So for retail sofas over 3,500 or 4,000, we're over 30% of the market.
Wow. Amazing story. Congratulations. And so going back to something that you said, which I had a question around this, is do you believe people are born with the entrepreneurial spirit, or can anyone be an entrepreneur with enough desire? I mean, you said at 14 you knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, and how did you, I guess you can't know, but how did it feel right to leave 5 years of consulting? You were making a good income.
I was making, for a 25-year-old, I was making a good income.
Yeah.
So going to your question, it's a great question. I believe that I don't believe people are born entrepreneurs, but I think people are born ambitious. I think people develop skills and desires through their lifetime, and sometimes it's in their formative years, sometimes it's later, based on necessity and hardship. I didn't deal with hardship per se at all, but I was extremely ambitious as a child, and the more ambitious I got, the more I realized I didn't want to work for people. And I joke sometimes about this. Today, I would make a very bad employee.
Yeah.
The first 5 years, I was probably a pretty good employee, but I didn't have it in my heart to stay an employee.
Yeah.
So I would say the ambition drove me, and that same ambition drove me to do other things in life, including being a good student and doing something as difficult as electrical engineering. And so I think entrepreneurs can be made. The desire or the ambition, the drive, can come from a lot of sources. And for some people, it comes from their family. Some people, it comes from their peer groups. Others, it comes from hardship.
Yeah, I agree with that. So one of the things I have here, so I have a note that is about your big personality. You have a really big personality, and I know that you know that sometimes.
Yeah, my wife reminds me of that. Sometimes it's too big for her. But
I don't agree, and I love your wife. I consider her a great friend, but I think your personality makes you exactly who you are, and it's a part of that ambition and the drive and your confidence with, being able to ring the bell over the years, growing a great business. Where do you get your big personality? Does that come from your mom or your dad or neither?
So that's a great question. I would say I was a fairly shy child, somewhere till around 14 or 15. Yeah. And so I'm short. I knew I was short. I was small. I grew up in a household that didn't quite fit in 100% because my parents weren't born here and didn't understand a lot of the norms, and so I was shy in many ways. And as I found things that I was successful at, and this is well before being an entrepreneur, once I realized I was a good student and had some leadership ability in heading up clubs and other things in school or in Boy Scouts. As I grew with my confidence, my personality got bigger. I think my wife would say my mouth got bigger.
Yeah.
But I went from being fairly shy to talking a lot. And so that
served you well.
And the personality continued, and I think it did come with the confidence that came from being successful with the business and managing through other things in my life as well. So it just grew. It snowballed.
Yeah, and so we talked about, you kind of hit on the discipline around education. You kind of skipped over some of that earlier. You just said, I was top of my class, yada, yada, yada. But I want to go back to you being one of the most disciplined people that I've ever met, which you weren't just the top of your class. Like you were the valedictorian.
I was falling behind my brother, who was also the valedictorian the year ahead of me in a 5A high school in South Grand Prairie. And so, yes, I was driven to outdo him, mm-hmm. which I did. And when I say I did, we were both valedictorians, but I tried really hard to get my GPA way above his, which I was successful at. He did go to A&M, and somehow I almost went to A&M, and late in my senior year, I was awarded a very prestigious scholarship at UT that was more on leadership than on scholarship. And it was, at that time, it was called the Texas Excellence Award, and it somehow convinced me to go to UT instead of A&M, and it changed the rivalry between my brother and I. We were then at different colleges.
Yeah.
But I continued in college. I pressed in electrical engineering, and I graduated with highest honors, and I made it out in 4 years without ever repeating a class.
So did that discipline from an early age of education, and you were a great leader in these clubs in high school, and I can imagine through college, was that something that was not forced on you from mom and dad, or was it highly encouraged, or is that just kind of in your nature of that ambition and drive? And
I would say that it definitely wasn't forced on me or encouraged. My parents were were busy working and didn't really understand a lot of the things that go on in the U.S. because they didn't grow up here. They didn't understand much about Boy Scouts. They didn't understand much about the college systems. My brother and I, if we had grown up with a little bit stronger encouragement, we might have went to Ivy League schools or other things. So my parents were very supportive, but in a limited way because they did not really understand. And I think this is common for immigrants. They both worked, and so they were busy. My dad was not coaching, soccer or being a Boy Scout leader or any of that. He didn't grow up in a society that even went camping or fishing. Yeah. So it just wasn't the type of things he did. But they were supportive. If there was something my brother and I wanted to do, they would certainly support it. They just wouldn't go out of the way to encourage it. Having a brother that was exactly 13 months older than me, just one grade above me, did make me fairly competitive. So if he did something, I was going to do it. And so pretty much with the exception of playing the violin and going to A&M, I did everything he did, plus some.
I think you dodged bullets on both of those.
Yeah, so I did. I did not play. I played the trumpet briefly. Wasn't any good at it. He played violin for 7 or 8 years, and then I think I did dodge a bullet going to UT versus A&M. And today I'm obviously a big supporter at UT, and I like the fact that I went to school in Austin. My oldest of 3 kids made me proud and went to engineering school at UT as well.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking back to this entrepreneurial journey, kind of giving us the background, Better Mousetrap, all about relationships, which I know we'll probably get into. I mean, you're a relationship person, and I think that relationships are such a huge part of any entrepreneur's success. I mean, you can have a better mousetrap, but people want to do business with people. I mean, so what were the biggest challenges to getting started? You said, you couldn't take, all the credit, or your partner Bob is the one who really had this idea, sought you out for all the right reasons because of your experience and discipline. I'm sure there was all these things. But what did that conversation look like? I mean, you're sitting at Cheddar's, I know, and he says, "Hey, let's do this."
So he came to me, and I think it was about September, October of 1990. And at that time, I was doing a consulting engagement in California. It was for a manufacturing business. It was when JCPenney still did manufacturing. I was living in L.A. with another Arthur Anderson team member, and we were in our 20s and having a good time living in L.A., doing stuff that 20-year-olds do. But he came to me with this idea, and he basically became a very good salesman at convincing me that this opportunity would be our way of getting our fame and fortune. And really, it's more about trying to make some money than trying to be famous. But it was a way. He came from a humble background. His father was in the agricultural business, was a farmer and cotton ginner. Just like me, we had decent upbringings, but nothing very high end. And it was a way to make money, but do it in a way that was extremely positive, creating value through products. Mm-hmm. And so he came with the opportunity. He had approached 2 other people, and that we put our company together with 4 of us. But if anyone remembers 1990, and Kevin, you're too young to remember this part of it, but we were in a recession, mm-hmm. and we put our business plan together. We put our best foot forward over and over and over. We went to bank after bank after bank. We said we're going to put this amount of money in. It was a reasonable amount of money for 2 25-year-olds, or 4 25 and 29-year-olds. I think the other 2 guys were brothers, and they were a little older. But after about 4 or 5 months of trying to get a loan, the other 2 gentlemen, it was a guy named Tom Gilmer and his brother, they ended up having to bow out. Both of them had wives and kids, and they had to bow out and step aside. And so it was a long set of conversations trying to convince us that we had a great business plan and we had a great idea. Tom Tom actually knew how to run manufacturing. He worked at Leather Center. And, Bob wanted me for my ability to put together the pieces of the puzzle that he didn't directly cover. It included IT, finance, some overlap in manufacturing. But he came to me because we had these shared values, and we had worked together on a project in the manufacturing space. But he did a great job of selling me that this was going to be our way. I think the sales pitch was 3 years to $30 million in revenues, and we could go public or sell the company.
And how long did it take you to get to $30 million in revenue?
It took us exactly 10 years.
Exactly 10 years. So everybody listening to that should understand that things just do not happen as you think. Things take time, right? I mean, the first 3 years you're probably just getting your basic
It took us
foundation.
2 years to get the manufacturing set up and a couple of products before we could even go to market. It took us almost 2 years. And, the idea that we were going to be up and running and sellable, able to sell the company. And, I say 3, it's easy to say that. It was really 3 to 5. Everything's 3 to 5 when you're that age. If anyone would have told me up front that it was going to be 10 years to $30 million, I'd say, I'm not doing this, right? I had a great job. I wasn't sure what my future entrepreneurial experience would be, but I knew it would be something. And, if he had started off with a story of 10 years, I would have said sorry.
Yeah, it's a good thing he's a good salesman.
He was a great salesman. And he honestly believed what he was telling me, and I honestly believed what he was telling me. So I think many great businesses are born out of the naivety of young people that don't know any better. And, it's like jumping off a cliff. You jump into the lake, and you only have one option. You can swim to the other side. You really can't go back up the cliffs.
Yeah. Once you took the jump, you were all in.
We were, both of us.
So what I'm curious about is how do you take an idea? Because my entrepreneurial journey is a little bit different. I was working in a business that was already a functioning business that it's tangible, but y'all really had an idea. And
it was a true startup.
It was a true startup, nothing tangible. You didn't have a machine. You just had an idea and experience and other things. But how do you pass the hat around like a friends and family deal to raise a little bit of money?
Actually, we didn't. We were surprised that we weren't. I tried. I had 2 uncles, and they were in the diamond business, and they were well-to-do relative to where I was. And asked them. I didn't really ask my parents because I didn't really see them as having a lot of capital. In hindsight, I wish I had asked them. I did ask my brother. He asked his sister. And I took my life savings up to that point, and as did he. But we really didn't. And this is where, if I had to do it over, I would have probably passed a hat further around and raised capital. But we did it pretty much just with our own money.
Okay. And so you pulled together 4 guys, got back down to 2, really.
Yeah, very quickly. Within 4 months, it dropped back down to 2.
Yeah, 25 years old, took all your life savings. And did y'all end up getting a loan from a bank, or was it, I want to understand, for someone out there who's thinking, I want to jump off that cliff and knowing there's no way, you can't go back up, like it's hit the water, swim to the other side and figure it out. What are the next steps?
So we went to at least a dozen banks multiple times. We'd get up, get dressed up in a suit. We'd take this fancy books and projections, and every time, and this was the recession, the banks were really skittish. Every time we took the book to a bank, they'd say, hey, they'd listen, they'd smile, they were really polite. But at the end of the thing, they say, why don't you come back and cut your projections in half and bring them back? Mm-hmm. And of course, that's very frustrating when you've already cut your projections in half 3 other times, right? Yeah. And so that happened over and over. We finally got one small bank in South Texas to agree to do it. It was a bank that Bob's father was on the board of, and we thought we had a deal. We got all the way through the SBA process, and then they pulled a technicality and said, the SBA's rejected this because his father's a board member, even though he had abstained and wasn't on the vote, but it actually got yanked out from under us. And that's about the time Tom and his brother stepped away. We ended up starting without a bank loan. And so it took us all of 91 and 92 to get going using our own capital, no bank loan.
Now, were y'all still working in the background?
So Bob was not working. I was still working. I had actually shifted in the fall of 90 from Arthur Anderson or Anderson Consulting to the George Group, which was a very similar type business, and a handful of my friends went over there. So I went over there, but I'd already had this idea started. And so I only stayed in that firm for another 16 months. But I was working in the background. Bob was full-time. And I think sometime that next year we got a small loan, but it was very small. It may have been even against a CD that his mother pledged. I don't know. We didn't get anything of substance until 1993, and by then we were shipping product. We were making some revenue, and we did a $450,000 SBA loan in 1993 with Bank of the West, which is a bank owned by Gary Blankenship out of Irving. At that time, they were small. Today, they're quite big, but they gave us a $450 loan. The next year, we got a $550 loan. That was in 94. And at that time, the SBA limit was $1 million for the 7A program. Today, it's $5 million. And so it was a very hard slog to get any financing coming out of the recession.
And what is the first thing that you buy? And then we'll move past it, but I'm just curious. I'm fascinated with, like, what's the first thing that you take all your money and you're going, okay, we need a building, or do we need manufacturing equipment? Do we need employees? Do we need...
So there's a story, and I'm going to give the very short version behind that. We needed everything, but we can't go buy a building. We would want to lease a building. We can't even buy lots of sewing machines when we ever got the bank financing. We ended up, through one of our initial leather reps, people that sold us the leather, getting introduced to two people that had a furniture business called R. Jones and Associates. It was Rob Jones and Brian Campbell, and we got introduced to them in 1991, and we ended up trading them some consulting services. Guess what? We were consultants, so we could do that. We traded them some consulting services for use of some space in the back of their factory. And guess what? They already had sewing machines, and they already had a forklift and a wood shop. So when we started, we kind of started in the back corner of another manufacturing business that had a lot of the things we didn't need to buy day one. Now, they liked us so much, they wouldn't take the rent in cash, and they decided they wanted it in stock. And I would say that ended up being one of the best things for them ever, and it was still good for us.
Yeah.
So the only outside capital was from them, and it was less than $100,000.
I love that story. When you're listening, if you're listening to this right now, I want you to I want you to listen carefully to the things that Sanjay's saying. You know, the work that he's putting in, working on the sidelines, you know, as they are building this idea. They're bartering out consulting with people trying to, you know, they have none of the equipment, none of the space. And today, that business, that story from where you started, the hardships, which I am very aware of going to 100 banks and them telling you how much they love the idea and love you and smiling, and then nothing happening. But that whole process, and then today, that business is doing $300 million a year in revenue. It's been extremely good to you, which has allowed you to step out of that business on a daily basis to go into now what is full-time investing, right?
That is correct. And so you're correct. This American Leather was absolutely the start that's changed my life forever. And, you know, not just in a monetary way, in many ways. It gave me the confidence as an entrepreneur to do other things. It gave me the capital to do other things. It also gave me the experience as a CFO for 16 years full-time, as the CIO and co-president. We did in that journey end up bringing in a third partner to do sales and marketing, who was with us for about 9 years. I stayed in that business full-time until 2006. And that was the first liquidity event that I had as an entrepreneur, other than profits and salary and, you know, profit sharing.
But a real liquidity event, like a life-changing.
Yeah, life-changing liquidity event in 2006. And that's when I stepped away from the day-to-day, rethought what I was going to do next, and went into a second business. And the second business is now called Trinity Private Equity Group. At that time, it had a different name. It was more or less of a startup coming out of a small services business. But here's what most entrepreneurs don't recognize. It's not like I woke up in 2006 and decided I want to be in private equity. I woke up in 1999 and decided I want to be in private equity in my next career.
Okay.
And
was that just a dream, or like what? I mean,
there is a you may be young to remember this, but if any of the listeners remember the .com boom.
Mm-hmm.
So here I was running a company at American Leather that in 10 years achieved what I thought I'd do in 3 to 5. But right in that 8th, 9th, and 10th year, I was watching people on TV becoming billionaires by coming up with some silly idea that attracted eyeballs, including several of my friends who were at Arthur Andersen, having on paper what looked like to be billion-dollar businesses. And I thought to myself, I am not going to just do furniture all my life.
Yep.
It was a means to an end. I wanted to do something else.
That was all financial. There was no passion for you, right? I mean, the business and the people and the processes, you were passionate about that, but there wasn't like a particular passion around furniture.
I had moderate passion because I loved the product we made, but I didn't have a lifelong passion to make furniture.
Okay.
I did have a passion to manufacturing things in the U.S., and I still do. I'd love to be invested in other manufacturing businesses in the U.S., but I wanted to move on to another career somewhere in the future. I didn't know if it had been 5 years later or 10 years later, but I knew the direction I wanted to go was toward private equity. And so in 1999, when I was really tired of sitting on my hands and watching people on paper become billionaires, guys like Mark Cuban, who I'd met when his company still had no revenues, when they became these. Anyway, I went into a program called this Chartered Financial Analyst Program, CFA.
Yep.
It's a 3-year program. I got my charter in 2003, and I didn't get an opportunity to really step into private equity until I had the liquidity event in 2006. So that was a 7-year journey just to start into private equity.
Wow.
From 99 to 2006. But, again, these businesses that look like overnight successes, they're 10 and 15 years in the making. It is 2019. So although the business I've been in since 2006, that's 13 or 14 years.
Yeah.
The journey started 20 years ago.
For you personally.
To get into private equity.
So when you decided to make the transition from American Leather to Trinity Private Equity, what did that transition look like? And, now you've kind of answered my question that I have written here, which is why you were ready for a change. Was that a good transition? I mean, were you and your partner on the same page that it was time for you to do something?
So it's a great. There's a little bit more to the story, but that was the broader story. I wanted to do something else eventually, but there's another part of the story. We started that business with the idea of selling it or taking it public or creating wealth.
Yeah.
15 years into it, we hadn't sold it, and we thought about selling it in 2005. The markets were really heated. After really looking at the debt markets, we decided we would recapitalize it instead of selling it. In 2006, we did what they call a debt-based recap. It's just a fancy name for saying we borrowed money.
Like a home equity loan.
Yeah, but it was a big home equity loan in a time when the markets were frothy, and we paid the money out to ourselves in some combination, and we bought out our third partner. He was ready to exit. It was a alternative to selling, and so my partner and I were on the same page that we were ready to monetize. We weren't on the same page about what I wanted to do next versus what he wanted to do next, but we were still good friends, and we had no hard feelings. And so finding a way to shift his equity up and my equity down and get enough capital out to do my next thing.
That was another liquidity event for me. So you recapped the business, but then you said, hey, I'm ready to go do my own next chapter. So let's talk about my equity and.
Well, no. So that was part of the recap.
That was part of the recap.
Part of the recap was to shift the ownership percentages.
Okay, gotcha.
And then buy out our third partner. And so, there's a reason though. The reason that I started Trinity, or what soon became Trinity Private Equity Group, was, and the reason I wanted to be in private equity as my next career is I wanted to take the money that I was able to get out of American Leather, and I wanted to find a better way to manage, invest, and grow it. And I didn't like the traditional. I just watched the .com boom and bust. I had seen, fortunes made and fortunes lost. I had seen my own father, who, although he was an engineer, he most of my childhood he was a stockbroker, and I saw him do okay, but not do what I thought would be, my version of the dream.
Yeah.
And so I wanted a better way to invest. And so private equity was my attempt at finding a better way to invest.
Your own personal
my
capital.
own capital. And as I got into it, I saw that I didn't have enough to do everything by myself. I didn't have enough capital to do a series of diversified deals. And so I had to come up with a format to do that. But I had enough to seed it. I had enough to be a significant investor, not enough to do those deals by myself. And so Trinity was formed and born around the desire to have a better platform to invest. And I wasn't wealthy enough to have a independent family office. The numbers needed for that was much beyond where I was in life.
So you started, Trinity Private Equity Group, you make the transition from American Leather. You had been working on it in the background, getting your CFA. It was something you had thought about for a long time. Now you're in private equity. You've created some wealth for yourself, real wealth from the American Leather exit. And I know when I met you, you had been in Trinity Private Equity Group like
6
years.
6 years. And I also had because the 2006 wasn't an exit, it was a recap.
Yeah.
And
okay.
when I met you was the month we did a second recap.
Yeah.
So in July of 2012, we recapped American Leather again, and that was the month I met you.
Yeah.
And I think about the time I met you, I was just coming back from a week in the Turks and Caicos.
Yeah, life was good.
Life was good. I
just got your new watch.
I showed up coming back. I had a new Porsche, a new watch. And, I had more money in my bank account because of the second recap. And by then, Trinity had also found its way. Keep in mind, I started with my partner Dan and another partner Bill in 2006.
Yeah, that's what I want to get back to. It's like that was a whole new entrepreneurial journey that you thought.
And it was a hard journey because 2 years into it, the recession happened.
Yeah.
2008 was really ugly. 2009 was ugly. And we didn't find our way until the end of 2009. So from 06 to 09, I'll call it wandering the desert.
Yeah.
I was wandering the desert with my two partners, but we hadn't quite found the right formula on how to invest and what to look for and how to raise capital.
Where did that desire, or where did that like grit to keep pressing forward when you had created some real wealth, or was your wealth at risk?
So my wealth definitely was not at risk, but
Okay.
my desire to not hang it up after one successful entrepreneurial venture.
You wanted to prove you could do it again.
It was an internal desire because people ask me, well, why did you recap? And I wanted to monetize some of the wealth, right, that I created, but the monetization was to give me some security, but it gave me financial security, but it didn't give me emotional security. The emotional security comes with knowing you can do it again, or knowing you can do it well, or knowing that other things are happening.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I wanted to monetize, and the other hand, I wanted to still show myself, my kids, my family that I had more in me. And at 40, I was 41 at that time. There was no way I was going to hang it up. And so the problem is, you start into a second venture, it's jumping off the lake again. Yeah. I wasn't at risk of drowning. I had enough money to not drown, but I had the risk of not getting to the other side.
Yeah. You're not an ego, but just kind of that would have been bruised if you had jumped off and then given up.
Yeah, it would have been ego. It would definitely been an ego.
Well, I think it's interesting. I've talked about this with other individuals, and I talk about it myself. Insecurities and how those play a role. I mean, I talk about your big personality and your confidence and how smart you are, but we all have these insecurities, right? And those drive certain behaviors, and so maybe insecurities early on.
At 41, I ended up having more insecurity than I expected, although I had a decent bank account. And so I felt good about the fact that I didn't feel like I could lose, some of the wealth or the money that I had. I had enough to survive without going back to work. But at 41, I did not have that security in not working, and so I wanted some security, emotional security, by proving to myself I could do something again. And here I am, 14 years later, 13 years later, I am a lot more comfortable in my own skin. I don't have insecurities at all, and I didn't have big insecurities, but I had some. It was a little bit of an internal insecurity. Didn't show a lot to other people, but I felt it.
You knew it, yeah. Well, when you get to ring the bell, I've talked about this a lot on my podcast in different episodes. I mean, every time you get to ring the bell, your confidence just grows, and especially when you know you were a real part of something. It's hard to stand on the sidelines, I would imagine, on Super Bowl Sunday and watch the last goal get scored and the team won the game and you didn't play all season. There's got to be, I would imagine that some people go home knowing that they were a huge part of that success, and some people have to go home. They got the paycheck, but they don't get to say, I don't know what that does internally. So every time you get to contribute and you know that your efforts helped drive success, then that confidence continues to grow.
No, I agree 100% that there's a lot of ways people get security or insecurity, and I love the fact that in the investing game, I'm getting better and better every year, whereas if I was a professional football player, I'd be getting worse and worse every year.
Yeah, I love that. Make sure you're listening to that. I know I have a friend who's their husband plays football, and they've recently said that that's something they're really thinking about. They've been doing it for several years, and they're kind of scared of what that future looks like, where you're getting better and better every year. So, okay, so let's move into just some quick questions. What do you look for when you're investing? So tell us a little bit more about Trinity, the portfolio, and what y'all do there, because you've mentioned $2 billion assets under management and the journey. It was just as long of a journey. We don't have to talk about how hard that was, but it was a longer, harder than you expected journey. You wander in the desert for a while. You guys have really grown into who you are over the last several years. I've got the pleasure of watching that. But tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so what I'll go to your question. What do we look for when we're investing? We really we look for people to invest in as much. And so there's two sides of our business. We do JV equity, joint venture equity on real estate projects, and we do operating company investments on the other side. So there's real estate and there's operating companies. Now, with operating companies, it's absolutely finding a combination of a business model, where there's something defensible or something that creates value, and the team, the partners that we're partnering with. And that's what led us to you, Kevin, and your team. But the number one thing we look for is the quality of the people, because at the end of the day, people matter. We invest with people. We care about people, and the people are what is going to create the value. In the real estate side, it's a variation of the same thing. We look, rather than at a business model, we're looking at an investment thesis. Are we going to construct it at the right cost so that we can get a certain yield to cost, or are we going to buy it at the right price where we can get a certain return after we rehab apartments or a hotel? But again, we're picking a partner to do that with, and so we look at the investment thesis plus the people. And so in both cases, one is a business model with people, and the other is an investment thesis on the real estate with the people. And at the end of the day, it's always about the people.
And how many investments do you all have today that make up the
So we have, I think we have around 75 or 80 total investments. In that, there's 5 or 6 categories of real estate. We have multifamily, senior living, hospitality, retail. Office, industrial, and then retail. 6 different categories. We have 13,000 apartments. We have 2,000 beds of senior, 1,500 rooms of hotel, and a variety of other numbers. On the operating company side, I think we have about 11 operating company investments, 5 of which are what we'll call control, where we have a majority, over 50% ownership in the business, and we have a handful that are what we call growth capital, where we've put money in not to buy someone out, but to help the company grow. And those are either earlier stage companies or companies that are in higher growth industries.
So has your strategy and your desire, or your hope for taking your wealth and going into private equity for yourself, has that has proven to be very good for you, right?
That it has. And
That's been a major.
Yeah, so financially, it has accomplished what I wanted. It took a lot longer, but it has allowed me to grow my balance sheet and to grow my confidence and ability to invest effectively. Mm-hmm. And so the private equity side has allowed me to get 20s IRRs, internal rates of return, which are considerably higher than the high single digits or low double digits that you would get out of traditional stocks and bonds.
Yeah, like Edward Jones or something.
Yeah,
whatever.
So if we go, I have a little bit with Merrill Lynch, a little bit with Vanguard, but everything else is in private equity or private equity style investments. Then I have a little bit of direct real estate where I may own the office building where my business is, or a few other things like that.
Okay, so I have an important question. I think you've answered, because you've said that your confidence have continued to grow over the years and you don't have these insecurities anymore. So have you proven to yourself that you can go do it again?
I absolutely have.
Okay. So is there any new insecurities, or is there something that says, or is Trinity the second version of I did it once, now I've done it twice, or is there something going on?
So Trinity has been successful enough to give me the confidence, and whether you want to call it number two or a multitude, because it's really a series of investments now. Mm-hmm. And yes, we're not batting 1,000. We don't have every investment work out perfectly, but we've had the majority, 90% plus, be very successful. I'm very confident that I have the platform to do anything I want within reason, and the ability to support platforms like Freedom Power Sports, to support other entrepreneurs in growing their businesses, and having a major contribution to that is something that gives me a lot of pleasure and a lot of confidence that I can do it over and over. I probably don't have the desire to do startups on my own. Yeah. Again, part of it's age, part of it's the fact that I don't feel the need to do that, but I like to be involved at the edge as an investor or as an advisor or as a board member to earlier stage companies and entrepreneurial ventures. You
want to see a big hit, right?
So now I'm just getting greedy, and I'd probably want to in my lifetime have a third. So yeah. American Leather clearly number one. Trinity has been just as successful. It's created just as much value for me and my family, plus about 1,000 of my friends and family.
Yeah.
So I've been able to share what I do through Trinity in a way I wasn't able to share it at American Leather. But I am very comfortable and confident that I could do it again and again. But I don't have a need to do it the same way. But you're right. I would like to see a number 3, number 4. And I'd love to see a big hit. One of the desires I have personally is to see a company that I'm involved in go public, or see a company I'm involved in some way become what we call a unicorn, something that goes to $1 billion valuation.
$1 billion valuation.
Yes, that's what I'd like to see.
So is that what motivates you to keep growing the business and taking the risk that you do? You're just one of the most hardworking people that I've ever known. There's not many people that I know that I look around and I go, man, this person just outworks, outdisciplines anybody I know, and you are that person. You're a lot like me in the sense that you don't have just a ton of hobbies and distractions and other stuff from your business obligations, but you have a family. You they don't go without from you, but you're very focused on your business, right?
That's true, and I wouldn't say it's just for the monetary aspect. It's probably because of my big ego.
Yeah.
My big ego wants to keep score, and unfortunately in business we keep score with numbers, and so
who are you keeping score with?
Just myself.
I know. So what's the goal? I mean, what's the score? What does it look like?
Well, the scores keeps going up, and I like it. it's fun and it's exciting.
So what's the score right now? Like, what does the future look like for Trinity? I mean, if you hit this, then you're gonna say, are you gonna say, okay, I did it and I hit that?
That's a great question. If you'd asked me 15, 20 years ago, I don't know what that would look like. I know absolutely what it looks like. We have a $2.5 billion portfolio. I have every desire, and I made this clear to my team 2 years ago that I wanted to get to $10 billion, and it's just a goal. It's not something magical. And I set at that time that is a 10-year goal. We're 2 years in, so I've got 8 years to get there. I have pretty good confidence we can get there. Do we need to get there? No. I also committed at that time to work about another 20 years in this business. I would give it 10 years at the pace I'm going and about 10 years at a reduced pace. And really it isn't because I need to slow down. It's because I do have a great team, a lot of people that make me look good, and those people are really stepping up. And so, 8 years from now, I would expect those people to be in roles that are the equivalent of what I have been doing.
Okay, so how do you, and then we'll start winding down, we're right about an hour, how do you find or define your balance in your life? Because how old are you today?
So I'll be 54 next month.
Yep. So
July.
And so for 8 more years, you're going to go at the pace you go at, which, by the way, for those of you who are listening, his pace is at a pace that is like no other. His work ethic and drive and all those things are he's in a less than 1% of the population with that type of work ethic and drive. And so to go for 8 more years, is that something that you're still motivated and committed to?
I am committed to going at the business pace, but I don't define. You've used the term, disciplined and hardworking, strong work ethic. I don't work crazy hours, but I work very consistently, and I don't take tons.
You might not work crazy hours. You're not working 100 hours a week like Elon Musk, but you're never not available at 6 in the morning or typically at 6 at night or on a weekend, and your schedule, your travel. I mean, you work harder.
I'm more consistent. I'm a little bit like the tortoise. I'm not working 12 and 14-hour days, but I'm working every day.
You're very consistent.
I'm very consistent, and 9 or 10 hours doesn't bother me. If I'm traveling, then I will work 12 or 14. If I'm at home, I will typically be home between 6:30 and 7 for dinner, and I don't work from home in the evenings. I don't work that much on Sundays. I will work on a Saturday if I'm not traveling.
Do you think that one of your biggest contributions is the fact that you're so productive so the window of times, I think a lot of people may put in similar hours to you, but they're just a lot less productive.
So my productivity is measured differently. It's what I can get to have happen, and I would say my engineering background and my manufacturing background is where the credit comes from. I like to get processes developed, and then I want the process to work. I don't want to brute force things to happen through my direct efforts. Now, there are portions of my business where I have to do that. You mentioned relationships. Relationships you can't turn into a process. I have to actually talk to people. You have to take lunch and meetings, and I'm not a guy that goes and has lunch with the same 3 guys in my office every day. I get out and I see people. If I need to see people in the evening, I will. But I'm more process driven than most, and so the process has allowed me to scale this business and the past. As manufacturing business have no choice. I don't make the furniture in American Leather. Never did, nor did my partner.
Okay, so what are you most scared of today when you think about, what is Sanjay? It doesn't have to be business. Like, what is a fear that you have?
I'm like a lot of people. As you get older, I fear mortality.
Yeah.
My knees don't work as well. My eyes don't work as well. I'm fortunate that my brain keeps working, so I try to keep that fear down. But I'm fearful of mortality. But I'm probably more scared of the future for our children than I am about anything for myself.
And so what do you mean by that? Because I've got, you have not grown children, but adult children, in the college years. Mine are 5 and 11.
I'm fearful that our economy can't maintain its position in the world. I am fearful that the government spending and the government debts will eventually turn us into something similar to some of the more mature societies in Europe. I want to see America continue to be the America that it was over the last 50 or 100 years in many ways. Now, everything can't be like the past, so it has to progress. But I'm fearful of that for my kids and my grandkids more than I am for myself. I hope to live another 40 years, and I think in the 40 years, our world won't fall apart. But beyond that, I worry. But I guess a lot of people have had that over the centuries.
Yeah. And so, what are you most proud of today?
I am the most proud of the ability to have created the family that I have, my kids, and the fact that they're young adults that are productive parts of society, and they're good kids. That makes me the most proud, as do the businesses.
Yeah. Well, you don't know this, and we'll close out. But just 2 days ago, Dennis over here, who is helping us with our Freedom Power Sports journey and kind of documenting some of those things, him and Sarah and Daniel and I sat down just to kind of give him a history of freedom. And I was sitting right over there, and when I got to the point of, I could feel myself getting emotional thinking about getting to the point of going to 100 banks. And I'll never forget Jeff Bundy, who introduced us, but through an email introduction, you called me immediately before I even left his office, and I remember having that conversation and us scheduling a time to meet the next day, and not knowing anything different than I had already talked to literally 100 people. So to me, it was just another introduction, and you asked a lot of great questions. And I had reached out days before that to this very large auto dealer in Weatherford, Texas, who has just done really well over the years. I didn't know him personally well, had met him a few times, but I reached out to him out of desperation. And the next day, desperation to help get my business started. I was in that process of my journey, had taken the leap of faith and was looking for an investor and someone to believe in me and help me kind of get going. And I left the dealership, and I was driving to your office, and I stopped to get gas, and that person called me, and I was literally looking at his car dealership, and he said, "Can you come over?" And I was on my way to meet you. And I sat there at the pump and struggled, like, do I blow off this conversation? Like, do I just say, "Hey, I'm going to be late"? Can I reschedule and go over here? And something said, "No, you've made this commitment," and I'm big on that. Meeting my obligations and commitments, and I don't like to be late and other things. So I said no, and I asked him. I said, "Can I come see you after I have a meeting? Can I come see you after?" He said, "Well, I don't know if I'll be here, but give me a call and we'll see." And I came over to meet with you and your partners. We went to lunch, and I'll just never forget that day. And the reason I'm saying this, what you're most proud of, is I know your family first and is absolutely, but when I get to the part of thinking about our initial meeting and what you've done for me, it has changed my life, dude. And you should be extremely proud of that, because today, Freedom Power Sports employs 350 people. We're trying to make our mark on, with our business, and we provide to our communities and a great place for people to work, and we're in an industry. I'm getting to live my dream because of you. And so I thank you for that, and I thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I remember that day. I remember the day we met. I remember driving over to the Weatherford dealership the next day with my son.
Yeah.
I remember everything about that, and that was July of 2012.
Yeah.
So 7 years ago next month.
It's a magical time. So just so you know, if you're listening to this, I'm not too I guess, insecure or ashamed. I've grown a lot over the years. But my path to starting Freedom Power Sports was extremely tough. It's knocking a lot of doors. The journey still continued to be tough. 7 years later, we have a great business, but we're growing through a lot of, we had this explosive growth. But the month that I met Sanjay, I was at the cliff's edge of how many more no's I could take, and the position that I had put myself into from really starting this business out of my back pocket with things not happening, unfolding the way that I thought. It's kind of like that SBA loan being pulled out from under you. I had that happen.
Yeah,
and
you had jumped off the cliff when I met you already.
Yeah, I had jumped off.
You couldn't go back.
Yeah, I wasn't going back, but that's hard. And I remember sitting at a dealer show in Las Vegas just that first or second week that I had met you, and I laid in my hotel room and cried like a baby because I didn't know what the future was, and I didn't even want to be where I was. I was asked to be there as a part of what we were doing in the business at the time, but I remember having conversations with you, and the only thing that gave me hope that at that time, other than my family supporting me, looking up to God and saying, I need this, but I was fragile. You gave me enough of a light to say, I think this is going to happen. And it wasn't 2 weeks after that, man, things started rolling fast. And it's been seven incredible years. And I think as friends and other things, we're just getting started. So.
Oh yeah, we are definitely just getting started. And when you look at my two journeys, I'm in year 30 on journey number 1, and in some ways you're 20 on journey number 2.
Yeah. 7
years is just early.
Yeah, just early. I try to remind myself that. I thought by now some things would be different, but I am actually learning to appreciate where I'm at in this journey, and I'm growing through it, and that's okay. So I don't know. Thank you so much for being here. Your story is incredible, and you and I are gonna do some work after this, get right back to it, and then try to go hit the Ranger game tonight. Right? Maybe have a cold beer. But I thank you so much for being here and just sharing this. I hope that if you're listening, that you're able to have learned from Sanjay the lessons, the hardships. Things take longer than expected. Taking some of the the ambition and drive, and how do you apply that to your own journey. And if you are an investor, if you have any personal net worth or anything like that, how can people find you at TrinityPrivateEquityGroup.com?
That's correct. So if anybody wants to know more about Trinity, please go to our website, TrinityPeg.com, or email me at Sanjay, Sanjay, at TrinityPeg.com.
Yeah, so, seriously, my dad, who worked his entire life for General Motors, and he didn't ever create a substantial wealth or anything like that. He's just a hardworking guy. I have told my dad he should put every dollar he has into Trinity and what they're doing. I'm not encouraging you to go put all your money into Trinity, but they get great returns. They have great investments. Their culture over there is incredible. I've watched. How many investors do you have?
We have about 1,100 current investors, and they're all individuals. We do not take institutional investors into our deals.
Yeah, so not traditional type funds.
We're very different, and we don't run traditional PE funds. We are a very unique model. But again, go to our website, you'll see. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, go learn more. TrinityPeg.com. All right, Sanjay, thanks for coming. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to the RFN podcast. Tune in for the next episode. Y'all have a killer week.